Let's talk about clarinet tenon corks and how we replace them. They're actually quite easy and every single director should be able to replace their own. When we look at clarinet tenon corks, we've got four. You've got the one on the mouthpiece, you've got the one at the barrel, the center tenon joint, and the bell. Of all the tenon corks, the center tenon cork is most complicated because of all of these keys that stick out over top of it, making it difficult to wrap the tenon cork around. So today we're going to do this one so you can see just how easy this really is. Now the first thing to do in replacing a clarinet tenon cork is getting the old cork off, anything that's remaining. So like this one here has the broken part that's out of it, but we still have all of this here that's attached. Let's go look at how we get that off. The materials we need for this operation are a cutting board, a new piece of tenon cork, a scraper to get the old tenon cork off, a ruler to help us make the measurements and cutting edges that we need, a fresh razor blade, and an emery board or sanding stick of some sort. The last thing we're going to need is some glue. The first thing we want to do to get this cork off is expose it. So we need to get all three of these keys off of the clarinet. I normally take just the bottom two side throw keys off and the bridge key here off of the instrument. Using a pair of flat nose pliers sometimes makes it easier to pull those rods out, but you can also just use your fingers. Now what we've done is we have cleared a space above the tenon cork so we can actually get in here and clean all this up. So what we want to do is we want to use our scraper. And the scraper has a sharp edge on one side here, and that allows us to dig in to the open spot of the clarinet and simply pull. This one has a bunch of tape around it as well, so we'll get that off in here in just a second. On this one, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a cloth and try to wipe this up. That's all we have to do in order to get that old tenon cork off, is take those keys off and go at it with the scraper and just scrape the material off. If there's any glue residues left over, we just wipe it off. Now if it's any of the other tenons, like the barrel tenon joint, we don't have to worry about taking any keys off. You can simply grab the scraper and go right straight at it. The next step of this process is we take our clarinet tenon cork, which is 3/4 of an inch thick, and our razor blade, and we lay this tenon cork into one side of the notch. Then I take my razor blade and lay it up against the other edge of the clarinet tenon cork slot, and I simply roll the knife into the cork to make a notch. Notice how little of the blade I'm using to just mark the edge of the cork. Then I simply flip the cork over, and I do the exact same thing on the other side. Lay it up against the notch, lay my knife in, and make a quick mark. The next step of this process is I lay my cork on a cutting board and I bring my straight edge up. These little notches, what I can do is I can lift them up with my finger and slide my ruler into that notch. And then I do a repeat on the other side, lift up the edge, and you can see how little I'm moving that notch. And I set my ruler in that. Check it on both sides. And this is the part that's the most dangerous. You need to keep your fingers back out of the way. So I use 1, 2, and 3 fingers, clear back up off the ruler, so I'm holding the ruler to make sure it doesn't move, and then I simply come in with my knife, or with my razor blade, and make a straight cut, cutting this cork free. The next step in this process can be the most dangerous part, where we're going to take our razor blade and cut really close to our fingers. This is rule number 1, don't cut yourself, and let me show you how not to. What you do is you take your ruler to the edge of your desk or table or whatever you have, and you take the new tenon cork and place it right at the edge on your ruler. Keeping your finger clear back off the side. I don't want it up here. I want my finger clear back over here. I'm going to take just the edge of my knife, not the entire thing, but just the edge of my razor blade, and I'm going to draw across in one fluid motion clear across the tenon cork, just like that. That's all there is to it. And you can notice how far away the razor is from my finger. I've got a lot of distance there, so I'm being really safe. If you leave your finger up here, you run a really good chance of cutting the edge of your finger. And what we have now is a beveled edge that has been cut back at an angle, and that's going to lay up and facing away from the clarinet. And now what we can do is, with that beveled edge, as this clarinet cork wraps around, that bevel gives us a place to wrap the cork flat against itself. The next step is applying glue to both the cork itself and the joint. You want to glue just this bevel edge. And not very much. You notice how little glue I've used on there. I can even wipe a little bit off. And then I'm going to flip the cork over and do this backside. It does not take a lot of glue. You don't need to have this thing sopping wet or glue running off of this. Less glue you use, the better. Then lay your cork down on your cutting board so the glue side is up, but the bevel is off the cutting board. Then apply glue to your tenon itself. And then I simply set my tenon along with it so I know which cork belongs to which tenon. The next step is letting the glue dry, which takes about 5 to 15 minutes. I usually like to wait at least 15 minutes before I start sticking the two pieces together. And this is contact cement. When they're both kind of dry and tacky, as soon as you touch them, they're going to stick and not going to move apart. Now the question is, what happens if I forget about it? How long can I go without having to reapply glue? And we've all done that, right? You're going to be in your classroom and you're going to start this process up, and then 5 kids are going to walk into the classroom and say, hey, can I ask you a question? And you're going to go do those sorts of things. You may even go teach the next class and then come back and go, oh my goodness, I forgot about this. And that's okay. You've got at least 3 hours before the glue is so dry that it just won't adhere anymore. But up to 3 hours, you've got plenty of time. Stick that thing on there and go. You're going to be just fine. Really, anywhere from 15 minutes to 3 hours, you're just fine. Stick that cork on there. After your glue is dried, we need to actually apply that to it. And some people will talk about in the back or in the front. Doesn't matter. We're going to take this over to the tenon. We're going to lay this right in the middle. So I like to use my ruler or my screwdriver and push this edge down onto the glue. I don't want to use my finger because the oils on my finger may cause the glue not to work. Then we simply work this cork down into the tenon, making sure that it stays inside of the columns and doesn't stick up and over. Then I'm going to go back to my ruler, and I'm going to use the ruler as a burnisher. So I'm going to take my finger, stick it in the clarinet tenon. I'm going to use the ruler in here, and I'm going to push down with my thumb. I'm going to press this all down, making sure I've got all of the cork pushed down against the tenon, making contact. Then I'm going to take my razor blade. I'm going to come right in along this side, and I'm going to make a cut and take this off. And notice I've left a little bit of material up over here, which is just fine. I can come in with my razor and make a closer cut. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use my Emery board or sanding stick. I'm going to come in here, and in circle motions, I'm going to take this cork off. The reason I do circles is I want to make sure I'm being really even and consistent all the way across the tenon and not just plowing a flat spot into the tenon. The next thing I want to do is worry about when the joints come together. When the joint comes together, this edge here could catch and rip the cork off. I don't want that. So I'm going to use my emery board, and I'm going to cut in or sand in a really I'm going to use my emery board and sand in a really slight bevel edge to the whole side all the way around to make sure that as that joint comes on, it has a smooth transition up over top. I'm going to repeat that process on this side as well. That way when I'm taking the joints apart, it doesn't catch and grab. Notice how steep my angle is here. I'm not trying to bevel out like this. I want as much surface area flat across the top as possible. I only want to take the very edge of this material off. And you can see after all this sanding that there's not very much cork dust because I'm not trying to take very much cork off. Take your rag and wipe the joint. Okay, so that's the cork on the instrument. And now most people are going to simply put cork grease on it and move on. But there's one more step I want you to consider. Cork is porous. It has holes that go through it. It does a really good job of sealing, but not a perfect job. So in order to get a perfect seal at this joint where these two body joints come together, I want to seal this cork off completely. Sealing it off also makes the cork last a lot longer on your instrument. And we do that with paraffin wax. Take your paraffin wax and rub it on this joint. And now you can see this gleam that's on that joint. And that's what I want. I'm going to start off with my fingers. I'm going to squeeze pretty hard, trying to squeeze some of that wax down in there. And then I'm going to put the joint together. Then I'm going to take my rag and wipe off any excess wax that I can. Now I'm going to take just a small dollop of cork grease and grease this joint up and test fit that joint. The only other thing I have left on this tenon is to put these keys back on, and that's it. That's all there is to tenons. If I was doing a barrel or a bell tenon or a mouthpiece tenon, I would already be done. Doing tenon corks really is that simple. All we've got to do is have some really basic tools, a little bit of time, make sure you're not cutting yourself, a little bit of patience to make sure your glue is dry, and you can install any tenon cork you want.